Hmm. Welcome, Liz, to our
Thank you.
conversation about motherhood and the spiritual path. And I felt so inspired to record this conversation with you because we just spent 10 days immersed in Australia with one of our teachers and over many cups of tea and muesli and listening to the cicadas in the background. We had lots of conversations around the path of matter and the path of motherhood and how the very domestic human work of being a mother is one of the deepest portals to a sense of soul. And something I'm super interested in is embodied spirituality and how to take all the different things that I've learned and many of us learn on the path and actually bring it into a holistic everyday experience that is grounded really truly in embodied reality. And I
Mm.
just loved these conversations that we had around motherhood. And I know of so many people entering into the portal of motherhood or considering that, people walking towards parenthood. And I imagine looking for resources around how to do this journey in a way that feels really aligned with the life that they're already walking and also balances all the different parts of who you are. That's not just a mother, you're a facilitator and many other things.
Mm.
So, welcome and thank you. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself and talk about who you are and what you do and anything else you want to share.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for
Mm.
having me here and thanks for initiating this conversation because it actually feels like such a deep, um, yeah, it's such a deep kind of code that I'm holding and perspective that I'm coming at life with and um who I am, in the world. I suppose what I do, I'm an ISTA facilitator. And I also, when I'm in Colorado, I hold monthly temples. We also do monthly family potlucks
Mm.
and see private clients, specifically working around sacred sexuality and helping people to start to feel more of their bodies, more of their beings. And I'm a mom
Mhm.
as well to a 6-year-old son. And um, yeah, I feel like something about the way that I have been able to come into this work, and I came into this work before I had my son. And so I received a lot of initiation, right? Like I feel like I was flooded with initiation, like a fire hose, it was like can take it into a certain extent, but you can't fully or I didn't fully digest it or fully land it down in my being. And then when I had my son, it was like suddenly I had to stop and I had to realize that there were keys and codes that I'd been given that were really for me to anchor more deeply into my body.
Mm.
And, and one of the images that I've always carried is like the image of the temple pillar, right? It's like you can't really be a temple pillar if you're not fully landed all the way down into earth, into matter to like hold that place as the pillar.
Mm.
And essentially, what the gift of having my son was the gift and the struggle of three long hard years of like really having to understand that I was given codes, I was given tools, and what I now had to do was continuously excavate and continuously allow life to initiate me more and more into this place where I could stand as a temple pillar, that actually
Mm.
didn't matter what I was doing in the world and where I was and who I was with, that like being a temple pillar meant you're holding the work in your being.
Mm.
And that felt important to me as somebody who had been sort of in this like chasing and going, and sort of following my soul from a place that wasn't fully landed. It was
Mm.
like getting the codes and getting the medicine in different places. Who knows if I would have ever stopped if I hadn't had my son, but it was a really good wake up call from matter of like, oh yeah, you have to be here now. So yeah, so I'll pause
Mm,
there, but it's, just a little bit about me and where I've come from.
mm. Yeah, thank you. It's really beautiful. And yeah, I know that you're co-parenting and navigating community living and motherhood outside of the framework of the kind of nuclear family structure, which we've actually inherited from patriarchy and religion and other things. It's not actually our natural tendency. And so I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit about how you merge the home temple with temple culture. And also maybe if you could touch on what temple culture is to you and what it means to be a temple pillar, because there might be
Mm,
people watching wondering what temple is.
mm. Yeah, I guess I'll start there because I feel
Mm,
like start there and move out. To me, being a temple pillar means that I am landed fully and listening to the subtleties of the body of matter while also being connected. So it's like yeah, like a fully anchoring um into earth and a
mm,
way of being available for to feel the nuances of what's happening
mm,
around. So like the access to synergy, to feeling,
mm,
um, like I'm getting a little, um, yeah, like allowing myself to be fully here.
mm,
And to me, when I think about temple culture, or like what we're trying to do in temple is to stand as pillars, right? So we're
mm,
all connected to our own personal life force
mm,
while also attuning to the life force of the field.
mm,
Um, and I feel like there's this way in which the culture that, through ISTA or whatever, is like that gets done and we include eros in that culture. Eros is an expression of life form, but it's also prayer, celebration,
mm,
grief, whatever's moving through the body, allowing it to feel fully
mm,
move and being attuned to the fullness of the group. And then there's, you know, families and
mm,
children
mm,
and ways in which, yeah, the nuclear family is something that historically is like its own little bubble that's sort of kept to the side. And then we go over here to be our individual selves, and we go over here to have our family lives. And yeah, I feel like one of the passageways that I've come through in motherhood is facing the deep loneliness
mm,
of and the deep need. And there's a way in which I felt really safe in my independence, right? So like
oh
it's
yeah, that one.
yeah, yeah, it's like, okay, I got it. I don't need anybody. I'm fine. And so again, like, and you could think about that as a temple pillar, right? And then there's this way of actually like needing and having to lean in and the vulnerability of having to lean in and say like, I can't do it alone. And
Mm,
the humility of I mean, this is what I went through is like the humbling of like, I'm really scared because traditionally I don't know if anybody's going to be there for me, but
mm,
like I need you. And there were
mm,
certain people in my life who couldn't meet me there.
mm,
But I think the beauty of coming together in community, right? And bearing our bellies together. So it's like
mm,
you bring your needs, I bring my needs. Like we're all sort of investing through our needs and leaning in and then supporting from that place of like,
mm,
I need you. I'm here. I'm in
mm,
fully
mm,
because I actually depend on you.
mm,
And I really see that. And I think, so the pathway for me was having a child, but I think it's also through sickness,
mm,
through one's passing. It's like there are ways in which our humanity becomes vulnerable.
mm,
And we realize like there's that cracking of like, fuck, I can't, I don't want to do this on my own. And I think what I started realizing, before I was taking my needs personally, like it's my need. And so I have to figure it out because it's
Mm,
mine. Until I realized that there are certain needs that are just shared among the collective,
mm,
right? And one of them being this nuclear family is sort of insipidly creating loneliness, disconnection. And so my need of community, of support, as I lean in to receive that, I'm also providing that for
mm,
other people in the community, right?
mm,
Inadvertently, because
mm,
it's somehow, through my own experience, it was like being fed in my need and having people show up in that vulnerable space actually fed this deep generosity, this like real authentic generosity.
mm,
When I see somebody who's leaning in and I have the capacity to give, I'm like, fuck yeah. Like I want to give to you. Um, so I feel like there's certain ways of which like, yeah, I mean, I really see that as the temple culture
mm,
now is like how do we on the ground create something where yes, there is this holding of ourselves, but also this willingness to be deeply vulnerable
mm,
to each other and deeply exposed to each other, um, so that we can be nourished and also so that we can nourish.
mm,
I think we need both. We need to feel like
mm,
we're offering and giving something, and also, um, yeah, I think we all need each other.
mm. Yeah, it reminds me of the teaching around service being the language of the soul. And actually, it feels really good to be in devotion and dedication to something, whether that's your community or your child or your work, and have this sense of like reciprocity cultivated within the field and the sphere of which you're living in, which is so different from the paradigm of trade and exchange, and you do this favor for me and I do that favor for you. And yeah, even I'm sure there's lots of beauty that happens when people have a baby and people chip in and they come around and they leave food, and it's this kind of peak time of support and care. And if you have parents, they might come and clean the house for you and different things. And obviously everyone has varying degrees of support systems like that. But similar to grief, and what I've heard from people who have gone through deep grief, there might become a time when actually that support falls away because it's this big burst of energy and everyone shows up for the crisis or the change. And then over time, it's like we come back into our normal mode of operation. But what I'm hearing you're doing is creating roots for the future and this kind of arms open policy of not just about motherhood, but actually a way of living and breathing. And I love that so much because it also reminds me of the importance of integration because, you're an ISTA facilitator and people go to ISTAs and they have huge, expansive transformational experiences, possibly. And often, just like every other transformational initiatory experience we can have in life, sometimes there's a big drop afterwards, and we might need time and space to deal with the changes that have happened in our life. And that can be applied to motherhood and death and any time of transformation. But I really feel like where we're going as a society and as a collective, and as people who have done a level of embodiment work and soul initiatory work, the step is actually living it and breathing it every day and not relying on containers for peak experiences and not relying on the experience of being facilitated into something, and actually doing the hard graft of laying the foundations for the life that we really want. And that for me has been a very humbling part of the path, to have gone into an experience of dismantling my life as it was over a number of years, and then being in the questioning of what do I actually want from my life and how do I make it happen? And it doesn't happen overnight. Like you can meditate for years until you feel a shift, and actually creating a life of really deep meaning doesn't happen overnight either. And it takes work. And I imagine that might be the case with motherhood as well, like showing up every day for an unknown outcome. but just the pulse of love.
Mhm. Yes, yes, that's so beautiful. Yeah, I love what you just
Mm,
shared. And yeah, I feel like one of the things that I am being taught in this like showing up is where I don't show up,
mm,
actually. It's obvious. Like through my son because he he sort of mirrors to me wherever I'm at. So if I'm distracted, if there's like something bubbling internally that I'm maybe not showing or revealing, it's like he starts acting that out. And I'm like, huh, isn't that convenient? But and also in the way that it's this continual process of letting go,
mm,
right? I mean, my son's 6.5. And so I've seen him go through a lot of phases. I've seen him, he's inside of my womb, completely dependent on me coming out, like still completely dependent, like we're still like one unit and slowly, slowly like moving further and further away. And so it's this
mm,
beautiful practice of getting to love somebody so much. And like the most healthy pathway for us is to continue to detach.
mm,
So it's this, yeah, this beautiful reminder to me to be present, to be
mm,
here now, because, he still comes and cuddles with me and sleeps with me in bed. And um, I know that, if he grows into a healthy adult, like there is a finite amount of time that that's going to happen. And
mm,
so it brings me to deep appreciation. Or when he's having an emotional reaction to something, I just have this reminder of, okay, I'm choosing this. Like I'm choosing to show up. I'm choosing to hold him here. I want this actually. And
mm,
so there are hard moments of the day to day, and like it is fucking exhausting at times. And sometimes I don't feel like I have enough space and I want more, or like many different things. And ultimately finding that place of like, I chose this, I want this is important, and this is not going to last forever,
mm,
is like really like for me keys to just continue to bring me down um
mm,
to the moment, to be in
mm,
appreciation of what is.
mm,
I just feel like it's such a like a mirror for our planet, this planet, and just life
mm.
in
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting, these topics to me around the schism of what purpose is and the different ways in which the spiritual path can be kind of taken down different roads. There's the ascension path, which can take us up and out and into kind of transformative evolutionary experiences through consciousness and accessing transcendental states. And that's been the path to God and the
Mm,
more kind of patriarchal path that came in. But before religion and all the different things that happened that took us up, there was the very matriarchal goddess culture, which existed for thousands and thousands of years on Earth before societal changes started to come in. And then suddenly there was this like convenient, like, let's just hide all of this stuff that happened before, where actually the body of woman was in all the temples and was revered. And these many, many, many statues that have been found in archaeological digs from tens of thousands of years ago, they are full-breasted women with big hips. And yeah, the sacred sexual priestess was honored and revered in the temple. And so there was this schism where the path of matter and being in cyclical reciprocity with the earth and being in connection with the great mother as a kind of and the honoring of the human woman was also a vehicle to honoring the great mother.
mm,
That kind of got washed away in the flood of religion and Christianity and all those things. But I feel it's coming back now, and there's many obvious signs of that happening. But what I love in what you're saying is just the importance of being here now, because our earth is like so thirsty for us to be in presence with it. And collectively, our children are so thirsty to be seen for the purity of who they are and not like little machines that are going to be tailored and condensed in the school system to then play their role and get a mortgage and go through the motions that actually it's clear that many of us see that that doesn't work. So that's just some things that arise as I hear you sharing. And I would love to hear a little bit about how you raise your son when it
Mm.
comes to seeing the truth of who he really is and not maybe, despite anyone's best interest, the perceptions of like, oh, I hope he turns out like this.
Mm. Mm. That's such a good question. I'm like, ooh, no. How do I? I hope
Mm,
I do, right? Like, I really hope that that is true and that is the case. Um, yeah, I think there's always been something innate in my being that wants to see people for who they are,
mm,
right? And so, and of course, when you have a child, like you want them to be kind and you want them to, like, there are things that I want for him, smart and like, all the things that we want for
mm,
our children. Um, and what's so beautiful is to just allow him the space to be him.
mm,
Um, and I think that that's probably a skill that I have, just given the work that I do in the world, is like giving him the space to be him. And also trying to find ways to talk about things. For example, he has his first go-to emotional reaction is anger. And so it's sometimes it's hard to be with, right? Like it triggers me. I want to shut it down. He's hit me in the past. And so there's like something I want to do to stop it.
mm,
While also finding ways to talk about anger in a way that isn't necessarily shaming him or teaching him that it's bad,
mm,
right? Because I do see what I see through it is like, oh wow, like there's a lot of power here.
mm,
Um, or there's a lot of grief underneath this. Like there's
mm,
something happening. Maybe he felt shame about something and his go-to is anger, or maybe
mm,
something sad and his go-to is anger. And so I feel like my job is to find a way to hold him in that space, to let that move in a way that's safe while also sharing the boundaries
mm,
of like, "No, you can't hit me. And like, I
mm,
need to hold that boundary. Like, you
mm,
can be angry. Here's the way that you can express your anger. You can go to your room, you can hit pillows, but like, you can't hit me. You can't hit the dog. Like we do have boundaries around what we do with our emotional bodies.
mm,
Um, and you can find a way to safely express that.
mm,
And sometimes that's hard, right? Because I'm having my own triggers and my own emotional responses. And so it can be
mm,
hard to, yeah, to balance that. But I feel like in seeing him, right, in understanding that what's happening in that moment isn't him, right? It's a part of him, his anger, but like it isn't the core of who he is.
mm,
And so I do feel like there is a way of kind of tracking the core of this being, right?
mm,
And I don't exactly know how that's going to continue to unfold, but I see my job is to continue to give him tools for this world where he can feel comfortable in his body. He can feel like he can express himself and he knows how to express himself. He has the
mm,
confidence. I really don't want him to lose connection to his core,
mm,
because I feel like the beauty, that we all were given with is we actually all were born with connection to our core, I
mm,
believe. And then, like you said, through, you know, various conditioning, it's like we get conditioned out of that and
mm,
into some other version of reality. Call it what
mm,
you want, and that reality doesn't always match what we feel at the core. And so we go through these initiatory processes and personal development and therapy to reconnect with the core of who we are and to realize that it's
mm,
okay to do that.
mm,
And so my deepest desire is that my son does not lose that connection, that
mm,
actually he gets to have that connection with the core of who he is and continue to allow that to unfold
mm,
as he moves through life. and not get
mm,
sort of caught in, I am this, I am an angry person, and then just carry that and swim in that through his life.
mm, mm.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. And it just kind of sends me on all these different spirals of where we can go. But yeah, I imagine it must be an interesting dance to in your work be facilitating people into their erotic bodies and having supporting people to access their anger and seeing the soul and the core of someone as an adult, and then coming home and you're doing the same at the beginning end of the spectrum. And I know for me that I imagine that hopefully if and when I am to have a baby, I will want that child to just feel like they can be the truest version of themselves. And I will want to be able to see them flourish in adventure and be like, go, darling, go and make your mistakes. But I also know that there will very likely be a part of me that's anxious as fuck, wants to control, doesn't want to risk their safety or their well-being. And yeah, like to know also that just because we've done a shitload of work on ourselves doesn't mean that we're perfect. And one day, your son or my child might be like pillow thrusting, like, God damn, my parents, like they did this and they did that. And I think it's part of life, I guess, just equipping them with the tools and to feel fully seen so that they know that it's okay. And
Mm,
hopefully the next generation doesn't have to go back and do so much unpicking.
mm,
Um, and I know that we talked a lot when we were together around the transitions and the cycles of transformational culture. And actually, 20 years ago, a level of intensity was needed because the calcification and the armor of society and the generations that had kind of come through of age 40 years ago or whatever was much more closed. Whereas now, over time, society is becoming more open. And so, in transformational spaces, there's an increasing accessibility to the subtle, and
mm,
trauma healing and repair work and embodiment work is becoming more accessible to people and more aware. People are more aware of it at a younger age. So I'm hoping for the next generation that despite all the many challenges with the fact that we've fucked up the planet and all the other things that have happened, there, I imagine there will be in collective terms a greater opening for the light to come through for
mm.
people that need it and want it. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really hope so. Yeah. And maybe because we fucked up the planet for so long, you know, that's coming through more strongly now because the next generation is going to have to make a lot of hard decisions. And
Mm.
so they're probably not going to have the time and capacity to have the luxury of what maybe we did for the past
Mm.
decade of, unpacking and, picking
Mm.
apart our experience, but actually
Mm.
probably need more humans that can just fucking come online, be who,
And get
and
there.
then, yeah, and
Mm.
do the work
Mm.
of their soul.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that also reminds me of kind of looping back to the question of purpose, where there can be, from what I see, this perception that to be purposeful and to follow a path of soul purpose or whatever kind of purpose can be a little bit more of the masculine side of things, like doing things in the world and making things happen and being a leader or having an impact or whatever it may be. But
Mhm.
actually, the path of matter, parenthood, doesn't have to necessarily be motherhood, but there's something so achingly deep about motherhood because you grow this soul in your womb and birth it, which is still the most mind blowing experience of life. Like, I still feel blown away by the beauty and the possibility of what that initiatory opening is for women, because as I've heard so many times, life is never the same again. And of course, you're not the same person once you've birthed a child. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
wonder if you could speak into that sense of purpose, being out in the world and being on purpose and being at home and being in deep purpose.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, that's, you know, so fascinating. I feel like purpose is really something that reveals itself in the moment,
Mm,
right? And so like and I feel like there is a lot of value in what you described as this more masculine approach of like, I have this vision, I'm holding it, like nothing's gonna get in my way. It's like you're like going towards something and you're holding
mm,
it and your
mm,
awareness moving toward it. And I think that's a beautiful skill. And right, we also live in we live in a planet, you know, in the cycles, and every day we have an opportunity, right, to
mm,
show up. Um, and and I feel like showing up as who I am is my purpose, right?
mm,
And doing that with my son. And so it's like if I'm not doing my personal work and I'm just getting contracted all the time, then actually I'm not showing up well for him. Like I've seen it happen a million times. It's again like here of like he's showing me where actually I need more space, I need, you know, more tending. Um, and there is something so beautiful about getting to live in a more routine life because I feel like my eyes are attuning more to the subtle,
mm,
right? And having come from, you know, the soul initiatory culture and this, you know, more masculine driven purpose, I think I didn't have the eyes to actually see the people who are showing up
mm,
silently day to
mm,
day and
mm,
actually living their soul purpose.
mm,
You know, like neighbors that I have that are tending gardens and giving away their
mm,
vegetables to each other,
mm,
or you know, mom friends that I have that are showing up with care and with love and just giving
mm,
soup to people, or
mm,
people in the community that are dedicating themselves to the homeless population. Like all of these
mm,
little things like break me open into seeing that actually purpose is so much bigger than just having a vision and following that.
mm,
It's like really fucking showing up every
mm,
day. Like to me, that's the
mm.
hard,
Yeah,
actually,
totally.
showing up every day.
Mm,
And and you know, working through whatever resistance I have to be here every day as best I can and to source myself with community like that
mm,
feels nourishing.
mm.
It's really hard work to
Yeah.
invest in
Mm,
relationships,
yeah.
you know, to love people
Yeah.
and to work through those subtle triggers and or the subtle things that come up or the boredom, you know, and the wanting to distract.
Mm,
And I feel that a lot with my son. It's like he wants to play and I'm like, I'm bored. Like I want
mm,
to like crawl out of my skin.
mm,
Um, and I think that's one of the ways in which, you know, just side tangent that I used transformational containers for a long time was to actually it was like to get out of myself.
mm,
So there's a way in which, you know, going to something that's so extreme, yeah, it can scramble a lot of the programming, but then it was like, ooh, I want more of this. I
mm,
want more of this feeling, this opening and this connection.
mm,
And yeah, my question for myself was like, okay, now how do I bring that and land it
mm,
in every day so that
mm,
I'm not even subtly, slightly escaping from my life so that
mm,
my life feels like a garden that I'm tending.
mm,
That's purpose. It's like my purpose is to be in my life and to tend my garden and
mm,
to notice the places where maybe it doesn't feel good or it isn't right or I'm not expressing myself and to keep leaning into those places.
mm, mm. So beautifully put. There's just so many rich things that you've just said that touch on things for me personally, but also just so many collective themes that I see around, yeah, the spiritual seeking and searching and the never ending pathologizing that can come in of, okay, when I do this therapy and when I find out this thing and when I realize why I didn't feel loved by my mother, then I'll be whole. And just this kind of constant hamster wheel of self-development and progress, um, which, spoiler alert, never ends, you know? Like, I think there's just got to be a point where it's like, okay, I've anchored enough of my soul now. There's always going to be more. How do I keep bringing deep healing to the parts of me that are unable to receive love and give love in a deeper way, and just get the fuck on with my life and show up to the fullness of my capacity? And I also love the exploration of glamour, the
Mm,
glamour of being someone in the world. And it's not just about the spiritual scene or transformational spaces or the kind of areas that we're touching on. This is something that I think the world over is tackling with, as you know, so many women are spending their lives commuting to a job to earn the money that costs exactly the same as their childcare. And
mm,
you know, there's many layers as to why people do that, and I'm not making it wrong at all. Like, maybe a sense of independence is really needed and supported, but we are in a culture that just still doesn't really revere the domesticity of parenthood. And there's still this outside view to being someone in the world in whatever form that looks, when actually, yeah, I'm very inspired by the silent garden tenders. Like, we've got a lot to learn from people who are not banging the drum about themselves, and you know, they're just chopping wood, carrying water, doing their thing, tending to the earth. And yeah, I think often in the pursuit of happiness collectively, we're always looking for the next piece. And actually, some of the most contented, spiritually attuned people are people that live in the woods and live a simple life, and are refusing to conform with a level of modernity that it's actually obvious doesn't suit us.
mm,
So sometimes, well, actually, a lot of the time, I feel like I'm kind of an alien now. You know, like, I've lived rurally for so long, and I really notice it when I come back to the UK, because I've lived out of the UK for 7 years. Things have kind of sped up there and digitalized. And so I
mm,
come back, you know, I either get off a train or I land like tired and from wherever I've been in the world, and I never have the right SIM card and the right data package, and I can never get it sorted quick enough. And so I'm always looking for like the train Wi-Fi, or and then I can't get through the gate fast enough. And I just
mm,
remember back to when I used to work in London, and I would be like running through to the tube and, you know, trying to shave 7 minutes off my commute home, and I would cycle as fast as I could to get everywhere. And now when I'm in London, I feel like an old granny that just doesn't know how to operate in modern society. And usually my sisters, if they're around me, they're just like watching me like, oh my God, do you want to move any slower? But there's something that's happened in me that, obviously being away, I've become unused to the pace, but
mm,
I've also become so deeply attuned to the subtle that
mm,
I have to kind of re-enter modernity in some way. And
mm,
yeah, it can be like a bit of an adjustment. And so I imagine that in the case of motherhood, going through a portal of motherhood, where, especially in the first year, life has just probably gone slowed
mm,
down to, can you get the washing on? Like, that's a goal, you know, for the day, is maybe to like put the dishwasher on or get the washing on. I can just imagine that, how that has deepened maybe like an access to the spiral path, or just
mm.
reformed thoughts about what success and achievement and life is.
Mm. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting because just saying that, it brought me back to the first year of Oren's life. And again, because of just what I was doing prior to him being born, that I was like,
Mm.
on this, transformational path, and very much like going around the world and meeting people and just continuing to open myself, that it was so painfully humbling to have to suddenly, like, everything sort of stops and it gets
Mm.
really small. And also my community was international,
Mm.
and so suddenly I didn't really have community where I was because I
Mm.
hadn't been cultivating it there. And so I was lonely. Um, and just all of me was going into attuning with this human and
Mm.
like his needs. And yeah, fuck, that was hard. Like, really. And I forget
Mm.
sometimes until I was actually hanging out with my friend's baby and she went somewhere and I was just with the baby and I was like, right. Yeah, it's like all about their needs.
Mm.
So yeah, so in that, in that first year of his life, there's like some magnificent beauty, of course, because you're like with this fresh, new, shining, beaming life. And this like um continuing to release parts of myself, parts of what I wanted, parts of my striving. It was like I
Mm.
couldn't, parts of me that wanted to, right? Like that were watching on social media as everybody else was continuing business as usual. And I was like, I can't. And
Mm.
having to face that was like wanted validation, wanted to be
Mm.
seen, wanted something, that I couldn't get, wasn't getting. And so it really did show me and teach me how invisible some work is, because I actually
Mm.
felt like, wow, I'm giving so much of myself and it's invisible. It's not just
Mm.
invisible, but it's expected of me.
Mm. Mm.
Right? There's like this expectation, especially for mothers, right? It's not the same for
Mm.
fathers,
Yeah.
but there is this expectation that mothers should be giving. And if they're
Mm.
not giving, if they're not doing it, then they're bad.
Mm.
So I feel like for mothers, where there's this extra pressure, right? That we have to give everything to our child. And we have to, maybe we have to have another purpose on the side, or we aren't
Mm.
doing work or doing our purpose if we don't
Mm.
have something on the side.
Mm. Mm.
And like, but there are so many people who are giving so much and
Mm.
like living their purpose is to help these human beings to grow up into
Mm.
responsible, connected, adjusted, loved humans.
Mm.
And yeah, like the fact that culturally there isn't a value on that, right? We
Mm.
don't actually support it culturally,
Mm.
just shows me like, where are we placing our values?
Mm.
It, should, but it would be very beneficial for us as a culture if we gave more
Mm.
support to mothers, to parents, to children, to help them to grow up in a culture that they feel loved and cared for in.
Mm.
But you're right. If I am, as a mother, I'm not being cared for, if I'm stressed about money or whatever, then suddenly like that's coming out with my
Mm.
child. I mean, I've seen it in
Mm.
my own
Mm. Mm.
parenting.
Mm. I'd love to ask you about pregnancy, and I'm thinking in the context of, well, however you want to talk about pregnancy and your pregnancy, but for maybe the male bodies watching and listening, or anybody who doesn't know too much about pregnancy and the spiritual dimensions of pregnancy, how would you describe that time and I guess what's possible physically, emotionally, spiritually, yeah, and what you learned from that time?
Mm. Yeah. For me personally, my pregnancy was actually pretty tumultuous because it wasn't an intentional pregnancy.
Mm.
Um, and I feel like there is something about this time of something's coming, right? There's this anticipation, something is coming. And my psyche was having to let go. of where I thought my life was going.
mm,
So I feel like pregnancy is this process of surrender. That's how it was for me,
mm,
because our body does something that we have no control over, right?
mm,
And yeah, and so it's just like this, I'm going to feed myself and actually surrender the outcome of what's happening. And then my body is just growing a human.
mm,
And the portal of birth, birthing that human, again, like one of the pivotal moments for me giving birth was a moment of like pushing and pushing and being like, oh, I'm trying as hard as I can, and he wasn't coming out. And then like having this moment of like, actually, like I'm not.
mm,
And rising to meet my body with,
mm,
it was like will and body meeting. My will needed
mm,
body. The body was doing it. And my will needed to come online to like give the extra push to help my son to be
mm,
born.
mm,
So there's this beautiful opportunity, I feel, of like surrendering into matter, really,
mm,
because matter is doing it all. Our bodies
mm,
are, it's like, yeah, our bodies are opening into a portal of the mystery, really, the mystery of life.
mm, mm, mm,
And I remember after my son was born, because my womb was just, had been stretched, had been open, like suddenly there's this literal like cavity open to the world. And it
mm,
felt like every sensation, of the world, joy, pain, it's like I was feeling it all. So it really is like this portal of um yeah, deeper connection to the atoms of the all,
mm,
of oneness and totality.
mm. Oh,
Yeah.
there's just something so wonderful, actually, and awe-inspiring for me to hear about those moments
Mm,
of literally creation in action.
mm,
And it reminds me of a dear friend of mine, Claire Eccleston, who's a home birth midwife. I've actually had a conversation with her around intimacy and birth, and she talks about the different ways that pregnancy can kind of impact a woman after she gives birth. And one of them is that you've been blown so open to the cosmos that you might need a bit of help to come back. And it can take people months or years to actually come back into an embodied sense of reality because there has been this very, um, I guess, otherworldly, like a stretch in space and time has happened. And for some people, there's like a restitching physically and emotionally and spiritually that needs to happen. And yeah, I could imagine that can be a very challenging time for people without the awareness of that or without the support to kind of come back into themselves.
yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, like culturally, what doesn't get talked about
mm,
with birth, and with pregnancy. And I remember having this feeling when I was pregnant, like, because I, look at these pregnancy apps and everything was like pink and white, and it was so like cutesy. And I'm like, this is not how I feel. Like blood and sex and semen, like that's
mm,
where it comes from, right?
mm,
And
mm,
so, and then getting tore open and, you know, like having to put yourself back together, like all of this is so, yeah, so primal.
mm,
And when we want to package it into something cute and babies and how cute they are, and it's like very like light. We're actually missing the
mm.
power.
Yeah.
And I imagine that could be confusing or even bring some level of shame for some people who
Mm,
maybe haven't, excavated those parts of themselves or had
yeah.
much experience with those parts of
Mm,
themselves. They're like, what's
mm,
happening? What's going on?
mm. Mm.
when you're giving birth and suddenly there's like noises and sounds coming out and shit and blood and um yeah, it's like really the
Mm.
practice of letting go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always curious about that when people post their photos of them, like this pristine, clean photo, and they might look a little bit tired, but I had Beyonce had her hair done and then she's like posting with her baby. And of course, the moments of birth, and it's just like one of the most magical moments. I imagine you might not want to blast yourself in your most primal, like animal self all over the internet. Fair enough. But I always just love the videos and the images when I do see that, because
Mm,
that's what I'm super inspired by my friend that I mentioned, because I feel like the great gifts of a doula or a birth worker or a priestess, like you don't even have to be trained in the arts of birth. And this could be a birth keeper as a partner or whoever it is, to be able to have the capacity to hold the space for that woman to go to the absolute core of her being and become beyond human in the moment that's needed.
yeah.
That's the art of space holding. And I think that's where, if all the work that I've done on myself could be for anything, if I could be of service to somebody in the moment where they were dying and needed someone who can actually hold their center, which actually happened to me once. And I wish in some ways that I was the person I am now, because I feel like I could have done a better job, I guess, but I did the best I could in that moment. And I do feel like there's some times in life where some inner alignment comes online and we just show up for the moment of,
Mm,
this is beyond anything the mind can comprehend. And I'm here in full dedication and presence to whatever the soul is journeying through. And
mm,
yeah, I can imagine to be out of birth or to be birthing and to have the capacity, which is innate in all women, to really go there, go to the depths. Yeah, it's quite a magic experience.
yes. It reminds me of, what kind of started our conversation, the temple pillar,
Mm,
right? Because there is something about those pillars at my own birth who are just holding, like they
mm,
are anchored and like available for whatever arises around
mm,
them. And they're just there holding.
mm,
And I remember
mm,
one woman, there were a few people at my birth, but there was one woman in particular that I was just like locked in on. And
mm,
like, and her
mhm,
presence, her
mm,
permission, the way that she was holding me as a pillar, as like, I'm here and like what's happening here isn't wobbling me at all. And
mm,
I'm here and I trust you.
mm,
And that
mm,
made me feel so safe
mm,
to continue to surrender and to let go and to open
mm,
because fuck, it's a lot
mm.
to come through.
Yeah, yeah,
And same with,
totally.
right?
Yeah.
For somebody to stand and to be there and to hold and just like I'm here and yes, and this is happening, but like it's not wobbling me at all. I'm
Mm,
here at this portal,
mm,
birth and the death portal. It's like people
mm,
get so activated and we lose our centers and we lose our ground.
mm,
And yeah, and to be able to people in that space. Wow.
mm, mm. Yeah, I had an experience with my sister that was deeply connecting to us when she was very, very sick. And I just came in what was needed. Oh, you're frozen a little bit. Um, I think my connection just dipped out.
Yeah, you're back now.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, there's moments in many of our lives I can imagine when it's a moment and we need to show up for it. Oh, I lost you again, but you seem back.
Yep.
Oh, well, maybe that's an invitation as we start to wrap up. I feel like maybe the like I could just go on, and on these topics because it makes me feel really connected to the primal part of who I am. But
Mm,
I wanted to just share that actually kind of coming back around, like, we talked at the beginning about transformational spaces, and a lot of what I'm talking about in these videos is around transformation and all the different layers and levels that can look like. And actually, one of the greatest gifts of the work that I've done on myself has been embodying, learning to re-remember the ancient priestess that lives inside of me. And I
mm,
haven't learned with my mind anything about holding space and ritual and doing the right thing and saying the right thing and having a good bedside manner and all of these things, but going into the deep space that can be cultivated in transformational spaces and containers and the wider spectrum of soul work, I do think rewires or reawakens the part of us that actually was around the fire, birthing women in the village, and was being a death doula. All these things that have kind of been forgotten arts that actually are as inherent to us as living and breathing. That's one of the most, I guess, the biggest gifts actually that I cherish from these years. I remember a number of moments where I just felt like my channel open and something came down and I was like, oh, okay, this is what it is to be a woman. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, 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 that's beautiful. And it's beautiful that, that there is more and more remembering of that.
Mm,
And yeah, that it's something that actually we get to have access to.
mm, 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 yeah. Mm,
Ah,
mm. Thank you so much for this conversation.
yeah, thank you.
Mm. Is there anything
Yeah.
you'd like to say or share before we wrap up?
Ah, yeah, I just that in closing, I feel like, as we integrate more of ourselves into life, that part of the work that we're doing and like building a new culture is like having to do this groundwork of the day to day, of the leaning in. And so, yeah, just a deep bow to everybody who's doing the silent work that
Mm,
maybe doesn't get a thank you, but they're doing it for something that they're deeply attuned to
mm,
internally.
mm,
And all of the parts of us that we have to face in order to continue just to show up and to show up and to trust that it matters.
mm,
And just, um, yeah, my thank you
mm,
moments to those people and to that attunement.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. Yeah, thank you so much, Liz. Really
Mm.
appreciate your time in this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Olivia.
Mm.
Same.